But it's biblically sound to say that we can be a friend of God. Now, theologically speaking, we don't want to approach God in a candid manner. We don't want to, lose that fear and that reverence, but we can be a friend of God nonetheless. The scriptures I'm going to be reading out of today comes from Hebrews chapter 11, the faith chapter, and I'm going to be reading from verses 8 to 19. And then I've got some supplementary scriptures that I would like you guys to read. So if you could, pull up Hebrews 11, and then I'm going to need someone to read out of James chapter 2, and that will be all the scripture reading for today. But I will start us out. Hebrews 11, verse 8 says, "By faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed, and went out to a place he was to go receive as an inheritance. He went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he stayed as a foreigner in the land of promise, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, co-heirs of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith even Sarah herself, when she was unable to have children, she received power to conceive offspring, even though she was far past the age. And since she considered that the one who had promised was faithful, therefore from one man, in fact far from one good as dead, came offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven, and as innumerable as the grains of sand by the seashore. These all died in faith without having received the promises, but they saw them from a distance, greeted them, and confessed that they were foreigners and temporary residents on the earth. Now those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they were thinking about where they came from, they would have had an opportunity to return. But they now desire a better place, a heavenly place. Therefore, God, I am not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. He received the promises, and he was offering his unique son, the one it had been said about. Your seed will be traced through Isaac. He considered God to be able even to raise someone from the dead, and as an illustration, he received him back. You see, Abraham was called a friend of God because he expressed faith in God. Who has pulled up James chapter 2?
Okay.
Could you read verse 23, please?
And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend.
That's right. So James, the brother of Christ, he says in his work that Abraham was called God's friend because of his belief in God, because of his faith in the Lord. It was credited to him for righteousness. And because of that righteousness, he was called God's friend. You see, the verse that we just read from, the chapter we just read from, Hebrews chapter 11, it shows us 3 ways that Abraham expressed the faith, which made him a friend of God. And that's what I want to look into this morning. So, the original author of Hebrews, when you look at it in the original language, you can see that in this sermonic epistle, he uses various techniques. And one of the techniques he uses, even in the very first chapter, is that of alliteration. If you look in the original Greek, you can see the usage of those same Greek consonants at the beginning of some of those words. And keeping in that same spirit and keeping with the theme of this sermonic epistle, I'm going to be using alliteration in my sermon today. For you, Professor Fischel. So, I want to look at the 3 things that Abraham used to express his faith, through which he became a friend of God. The first L would be Abraham listened. In Hebrews 11, verse 8, it says, Abraham expressed faith to obey. Abraham listened to the Lord. He obeyed God's call in his life. Abraham went through so much, but God had given him a grand promise. He was called to pick up and move his entire life. So the story goes. We're all familiar with the story of Abraham, Father Abraham, and through him we have received the lineage of David, the lineage of Christ. Through him we have received Israel,